Hello and welcome. My name is Brian Kaplan. I'm editor of the Banker magazine. We're in Mendoza for the annual meeting at the Inter-American Development Bank, and I'm with Ernesto Revilla, who's the head of Latam economics for Citibank. Ernesto, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Now, one of the interesting things, just prior to the conference, of course, we've had the sort of pronouncements from Donald Trump about possible trade wars. How concerned are people in Latin America about the outbreak of a possible trade war?
Sure, thank you, Brian. Thank you for the invitation. It's for sure a concern. I mean, one of the things that can derail the nice synchronized growth that we have in the global economy is trade wars. So for sure we are paying attention. Now the good news is that Latin American economies are growing well.
Yeah.
We forecast acceleration in most of them. As of today, these trade issues are still on the margin of the whole size of global trade. So we'll be watching carefully, but Latam has good internal and domestic demand to sustain growth this year.
But one of the things that's been mentioned to me is that they think in some ways this might be good news in disguise, because it could be a spur for some of the Latin American countries to integrate more with each other and perhaps do deals with other parts of the world like the European Union and perhaps push this process forward a bit. Do you share that idea?
For sure. I mean, the idea of Latam diversifying its trade more within the region and across other regions other than the US is a welcome news. We've seen signs in the data already of Mexico importing from Brazil and Argentina more than in the past, and even talk in all of these countries in the region about looking more to themselves to strengthen the regional market. That's good news for sure.
And one of the things that would be needed to do that, presumably, would be some better infrastructure linking up the different countries. I mean, do you see signs of that being put into place?
Well, that's very interesting, because one of the binding constraints for growth in Latin America has been the low quality and quantity of infrastructure. So there's much more talk right now about new financing mechanisms, funds that can be allocated for infrastructure purposes. Governments are working toward that, so that will be very welcome news.
Okay. Now, you mentioned the economies are growing. We did have some years of recession in Latin America, but they're only growing slowly, aren't they? We're not back to the sorts of boom years that we have seen in the past in Latin America. Is that good news or bad news?
No, that's correct. I mean, we are forecasting accelerating growth in 2018 relative to 17 for most economies in the region, but it's still far away from the 10-year average that they had in the past years. China is not growing as strongly. Commodities are not at the level where they were. So growth would be better if it were faster, for sure, but it's still acceleration and still enough to bring down unemployment levels and increase welfare in these countries.
Now, how much are you finding that people that you speak to are concerned about political risk in Latin America? We've got key elections in Mexico and Brazil and a number of other countries, and on each election we've got populist candidates.
For sure. Well, politics is the main question, if not the only question we get now. We have a very tough calendar of elections in the region. Most notably, we have elections in Colombia, Mexico, and Brazil, just to mention three, but there are more.
Yeah.
These are very important for markets, and they are watching, because the continuation of good macroeconomic policies and to keep strong macroeconomic fundamentals is incredibly important for Latin America. So these elections are going to be very important.
But strangely enough, the markets don't seem very worried about it, do they?
Not yet. But we have a rule of thumb in Citi. In Citi markets, we have published about 3 months before the election, markets start to pay attention. And,
so you're saying it's too early for them?
Exactly. The currency starts to underperform 3 months before the election. So we are about to enter that window in Mexico, later in Brazil. So I expect some volatility for sure, because as I said before, elections are going to be very important.
Okay, we'll hope for the best outcome. Ernesto, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thanks, Brian.